Hi, and welcome to Girls' Lunch, your mealtime companion where we talk about food, gender, and sexuality, and where everyone is welcome.
Oh, me? I'm Nicole Hilton.
And I'm Julia Andreas.
And, Julia, do you have a favorite cooking show? Or a show on the network formerly known as the Television Food Network?
What's it known as now?
It's called Food Network. It used to be called
okay.
Television Food Network, like TVFN, but now it's just Food Network.
I was like, did they change it? Okay.
No, not yet. They haven't rebranded as, like, Guy Fieri's show place yet. Although maybe that'll come.
I was about to say, does Dine-In Drivers and Dives count as a cooking show? Because, like, that's up there.
I mean, I think so. People do cook in diners, drive-ins, and dives.
People do cook. Good Eats, does that count?
Oh, yeah.
That one for sure was a favorite. And anything by Ina Garten.
So you're a fan of the Barefoot Contessa?
I am a huge fan of the Barefoot Contessa. A DC girl, much like myself. I feel like so connected to her on a spiritual level.
Nice. I mean, we will talk about the many definitions of, like, what is considered a cooking show and how that has changed over time. Some of my favorites. I mean, like, I grew up watching the Food Network at a very young age. My mom always tells this story of, like, she used to put on PBS, like, cooking shows for my brother and I, like, of the, oh, it's so boring. Like, this is going to get these kids to take a nap. Which did work for a while, and then we were like, actually, this is really interesting. I do want to watch, we always watch this show called The Two Fat Ladies. Do you know this one?
I don't.
Oh, okay. Well, there are these, as the title implies, two fat ladies, self-professed, who, like, I think they're British, and they always open the show by driving in on, like, a motorcycle and a sidecar. I remember that. They kind of just, like, they have the, like, we're going to do what we want attitude. And, like, looking back, I'm like, is this the best show for children? Not in, like, a necessarily inappropriate way, but I'm like, why did my mom think this would be boring and nap-inducing? So we watched that. I definitely was a big, and this will certainly be apparent as we get into the episode, I was a big Emeril fan as a kid. I think he has a personality that kids like, which is big and loud. So as we've sort of already alluded to, today's topic is cooking shows. I thought this would be a nice segue from our previous episode about Fanny Farmer, who, like, I mean, you could maybe argue is a sort of predecessor to the cooking show in a way of, like,
totally.
She was very known for her cooking demos, right?
Yeah, she would have been a Food Network star for sure. For sure.
If born in a different era. Food Network.
Yeah.
The next Food Network star, it's Fanny Farmer.
It's Fanny Farmer.
The time period where we're going to start our episode today sort of picks up where Fanny Farmer leaves off in the sense of, like, the 1920s or so. And I also wanted to do this topic because it was a listener suggestion. So, listener Lily, thank you for suggesting this topic. If you, dear listeners at home, have an episode suggestion, you can always send it to us at girlslunchpodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us at girlslunch. You can send us a carrier pigeon, and we will add it to our very long list of show topics, but we will probably get to it someday.
There is no order to our chaos of choosing the next episode by any means.
Absolutely not. It is purely vibe-based. I think to start our discussion about cooking shows, when Lily posed this topic to me, she sort of phrased it as like what's up with cooking shows? Like, why do we have those? Like, why is that appealing? Why is that something that, like, people like to watch? So to answer that central question of, like, why do we have cooking shows? In my research, I have found that there are usually three main purposes. Two of these are really, like, very similar. So the three main purposes are to inform, to educate, and to entertain. There is a lot of debate, as we will talk about, and there's also a lot of, like, pendulum swinging between these three, but it is usually at least one of these, if not multiple. I would also argue it could be a sort of, like, spectrum of, like, high information, low entertainment, somewhere in the middle, something like that. So those are the three things that we will sort of be talking about. So Lily, I guess if you want to skip the rest of this episode, you can. We answered your question. Thanks everybody. It's been a great one.
This has been Girls Lunch. Thanks for lunching with us.
Yeah, see you next time.
See you never. We're gone.
Bye. Okay.
Bye.
So before I get into the specific history, I think it's worth also saying that, as I was doing this research, it was hard to keep everything kind of contained. I felt like it was just like do we all know Stregonona? We know the story Stregonona.
I do.
With this Italian witch who has this magical pasta pot, and there's one day where things happen and the pasta pot overflows and the whole town is flooded with pasta, right? So me trying to do, I think this is a common experience for us doing research for this episode, but me doing research for this episode was a lot like trying to keep the lid on the pasta pot, of there are so many other things that could be talked about or that this topic intersects with, but trying to keep it contained was a challenge. And I think that's mostly because, so Julia, if you will remember, another great hallmark of our time together, methods of literary study that we took together and suffered together. Basically, it's just modernist critical thought. The idea being that anytime a text, and I'm using text loosely here, so that could be a show, a novel, a book, a magazine, whatever the text is, right? Cooking shows at the end of the day are a text through which we can understand the time that they were produced in. Cooking shows mirror a lot of American history, food trends, major socio-political events, because they are a text, which is a reflection of the time period and the cultural forces that it was created in, etc., etc. This is not a literary criticism podcast, but
I'm back in that classroom, man. I'm there with my notebooks.
Yep. Just trying not to sweat or cry. I think that's just worth mentioning that that I think was the reason why I was having trouble keeping this down to maybe more manageable topic and everything, is because cooking shows kind of encapsulate everything about American history because they take place over a lot of America's history. So let's talk about that history. We have pretty much had cooking shows as long as we have had TV, and really you could even argue we had a form of cooking shows before we had TV. So I would argue that a progenitor of TV cooking shows would be other domestic media marketed towards women. So we've talked a lot in the past about ladies' magazines, and I don't think we've talked about it a lot yet, but it definitely seems like a topic rife for exploration is radio. So we're going to start in the 1920s and 30s with radio, which is what we have before we have TV. Picture it, America, the 1920s.
I'm there. I'm wearing a flapper dress.
You got a short bob haircut.
I do, actually. So it works out.
Exactly. Prior to this, it was very common to have domestic servants working in middle class, upper middle class, rich households, right? So at this point in time, it becomes less common to have domestic servants, and the middle class housewife is expected to manage or become an expert in domestic work that was previously outsourced, including cooking. So because we live in a capitalist society, lots of industries crop up to fill this kind of need, right? Of basically there's this anxiety of I'm a new housewife, but I don't really have these skills in domestic work. How do I do this? And so this is business, right? Of when there is a need, industry shows up to fill that need and make money. So we have ladies' magazines, newspaper columns, and radio shows all market to this audience of middle-class ladies who are trying to figure out how do I manage a household. We also have formalized recipes. Thanks, Fanny.
Thanks, Fanny.
Thanks. And that makes that easier as well, right? For distribution of hey ladies, here's something you can make for dinner for your family, and that can be easily printed in a newspaper or a magazine. It can be easily read out on the radio. So radio shows often have variety shows geared at women. So I wrote as like similar to an Audible version of a ladies magazine, right? So it'll be like a 30-minute show, and they'll have, 5 minutes about child rearing and 10 minutes about cleaning, and it's like just various topics that are all sort of strung together.
Boy, I love how things are cyclical.
I think
you
you combine cyclical and circular.
I think I did. I made a new word, everyone. You're welcome.
Yay.
I'm Shakespeare now. But I love how things are cyclical, As soon as we can talk to ladies about household management and cooking in a new media format, we will. Is it the same media format as 100 years ago? Maybe.
More or less.
It just comes back around.
Yeah, and also as soon as we have a new medium with which to reach women consumers and therefore sell them things, gotta get in there.
Gotta get in there.
Along those lines, a lot of these like radio variety shows are produced by corporations who are intending to market their products. So Betty Crocker, who is a future episode, I think, Procter & Gamble, A&P grocery stores, etc. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that these radio shows, I mean, like, they are giving advice and recipes and all that type of stuff, but it is like sort of an infomercial at the same time. It's like, oh, dear beautiful host lady friend, I'm having trouble like keeping my house clean, or like, how do I get rid of grass stains on my kids' pants? And they're like, well, if you use Procter & Gamble Tide detergent, then that will be great for, like that type of thing. There is one famous radio show that is not necessarily sponsored in this way, or at least not by a corporation. It is sponsored by perhaps the biggest corporation, the U.S. government.
Gasp.
I don't want to get into like too much of the radio shows because it's not actually what we're talking about, but this one is so interesting to me. There's one called Housekeeper's Chat, who is hosted by Aunt Sammy, who is supposed to be the wife of Uncle Sam.
So they're both just named Sam and Sammy?
I guess.
He's married? Does he have like kids named like Samantha and Sam with 2 M's? I couldn't think of
Samwell.
Like Samuel.
Samwise.
Samwise Gamgee. Is there a whole Sam family?
Yeah, it's just like Sam quadrupled.
A
Samily? No!
Oh no, your pop filter.
I laughed so hard I hit my pop filter. Oh, that's so good. So this Housekeeper's Chat show, hosted by Aunt Sammy, who's obviously a character, who also, they record different versions of it for different parts of the country. So Aunt Sammy always has like a regionally specific accent. So
localization.
Yeah, the Aunt Sammy of New York has like a New York accent, and the Aunt Sammy of Texas has like a Texas accent. And she gives like nutrition and household advice, including a segment called What Shall We Have for Dinner? And this runs for almost a decade, because my God, in the year 2024, I think we still have not figured out what is for dinner, It's a question without a true answer.
A question we will ask forever until the end of time.
Exactly. So the format of these radio shows is similar to an advice column, in the sense of like women will write in with problems and the host gives them advice and help. It's not really like a cook along with me type of thing like we're used to seeing with a TV cooking show, but it's more of like, the host will read you a recipe or give you some quick tips. So if it's like, how do I braise a lamb? She'll be like, well, make sure that you do this. And then if you're a little housewife, you're sitting by the radio with your pen and paper and you take notes. Or she'll be like, try making this beautiful spaghetti bolognese for dinner tonight. Ingredients: 1 cup of noodles, or whatever.
Spaghetti.
And so you would be sitting writing all that down, or you can write to the radio station and ask for them to mail you the recipe. We sometimes do get radio cookery shows with a trustworthy host who is a lady you can trust, who is an expert but also like a good friend. So she might be like a nutritionist, a home economist, something like that. Women sort of build basically parasocial relationships because of this.
Yeah.
I think it's the influencer factor, right? Of like, oh, I feel like this person is like my friend and I can ask them about anything, right? Because there's a lot of the like listener host kind of communication, even though it's pretty delayed of like you write them a letter and then maybe they'll read it on the air or something. So that is radio shows, which, you know, is going on through the 1920s, 1930s. We then get to the 1940s and the 1960s where we get TV. And TV becomes popular, especially after World War II. So at the very beginning, like any new technology, at the very beginning, TV is expensive.
TV is expensive.
Yeah, TV is expensive. Most families don't have a TV in the home until, I can't give an exact year, but definitely it picks up like after World War II because also like economic conditions are great and everybody has money and all that type of stuff. But in the beginning, TV networks, and there's also only like 4, right? There are very few stations at this point. They originally conceive of shows that would be like family programming. This is something that we don't have immediately off the bat, is like programming to a specific audience, right? Of like, this is a show for women, or this is a show for kids, or this is a show for teens. You just sort of have shows. Then, as TV becomes more popular, more accessible, TV stations do start to tailor their programming. And they do this mostly based on when they believe particular audiences will be watching. They intentionally start airing children or more child-friendly programs in that like late afternoon block when kids get home from school.
Uh-huh.
Women get daytime TV because, of course, they are at home cooking, cleaning, doing all of their duties, and that I guess TV producers think that like the women will just like put on the show while she's going about the house cleaning, that type of stuff. So cooking shows become like a pretty obvious choice, right? Cooking shows are really easy to make. They're inexpensive to produce, right? You don't need like big celebrities. You do like need a kind of kitchen, but you don't necessarily need, there's no fancy technology necessarily. And it's also especially cheap to produce when your show is basically an infomercial for Westinghouse blenders or whatever, because it's very easy to get sponsorships for these. So Julia, I think for the folks at home to get an idea of like what are these early TV cooking shows like, I would like you to read this highlighted quote from Television Cooking Shows Defining the Genre, which is a dissertation I read from Lori Brost, who I read so much of this dissertation. I'm actually, the more research I do for this show, the more I'm like, actually PhD grad students are the backbone of academia. Like, I have found so many, like, dissertations at this point where I'm just like, I should write them a letter and be like, thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you for your hard work and all those grueling years of getting your doctorate.
So thanks, Lori. I guess I should say Dr. Brost at this point. But this is her description of, like, early TV cooking shows.
Cool. Most shows were aired live from a television studio. Studio sets were constructed to look like middle-class home kitchens, complete with appliances, cabinets, and counters, cookwares, and sometimes running water. Most of the hosts of the TV shows were women. Based on observations of pictures taken at the time, the female hosts appeared to have dressed in fashionable yet casual dresses, had their hair professionally styled, and wore a modicum of jewelry. These women represented the new concept of middle-class femininity. Prior to their television careers, some of the women had been home economics experts, nutritionists, cooking school teachers, restaurant owner-operators, the head of an independent commercial test kitchen, and others had hosted radio programs for women. So, based on this, my first thoughts are, A, Fanny Farmer would have definitely had a cooking show.
Yeah.
Just like, hands down, no way she wouldn't have. And B, it seems like the set of what a cooking show is and the people who are in them has not changed much.
No. Like, I think if we were to think of, like, what is the platonic ideal of a cooking show, right? If I told you, like, imagine a cooking show, I think a lot of people would picture this.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this later as well, but there's some gendered expectations here of, like, if you're going to be a woman on TV, you still have to look good. Even if you are arguably, like, a chef, you're still going to be dressed in, like, relatively latest fashions. You know, you're going to have your hair done, makeup, jewelry, all that type of stuff. And it's also, I think, worth noting that the goal is to sort of mirror the audience in a way of, like, since TV producers are expecting or hoping that middle-class women are going to be the ones watching, they want the host to sort of look like them which I think increases that like trustworthiness factor of like, oh, she's just like me. I can trust what she's saying about Westinghouse blenders or KitchenAid mixers or whatever. And it should also be stated, I want to explicitly call this out, of like, the intended audience is married middle-class women. We are not talking about single women. We are not talking about, you know, a woman cooking for herself. This is married middle-class women who need to cook for their family and their husbands. Family and or husbands.
The only way.
Definitely not targeted towards men at all. I mean, not to say like, oh, men didn't watch cooking shows. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, the intended audience is, like I said, married, middle-class women who also have the time to cook. We do not yet have the, like, quick 15-minute dinner, you know, but we'll get there. And so if we're thinking back to our original, like, 3 purposes of a cooking show, this genre or this generation of cooking shows definitely falls more into the category of, like, informing and educating, you know, not especially exciting, not to say, like, I mean, they were maybe a little boring, maybe a little dry. We definitely don't have any flashy, like, bam, yet.
This is what your mom intended to get you and Chris to nap.
This is what my mom wanted me and Chris to watch, to nap. So I want to also talk about, I had such a hard time figuring out, like, which cooking shows to talk about. Because obviously, like, as we get into more modern times, we know a lot of these probably. I would imagine most of our folks listening at home, you know, are familiar with the Food Network. But I wanted to talk about some of the kind of like earlier shows. So in 1946, we have James Beard's I Love to Eat, which is broadcast on NBC. It's the first nationally televised cooking show. Because at this point, a lot of shows are just local. I mean, think of like your local PBS station, right? Your local public stations. So James Beard, nowadays we know him for the James Beard Award, is, you know, showmanship and entertainment in addition to like the idea of like education or recipes or cooking demos. It's important to note that Beard is a professional chef and also a man, which is different than the demographic of most of the cooking show hosts at this point. I mean, James Beard is early to the party, right? It's 1946, so not a lot of people have TVs at this point. Something that I read was interesting was a lot of men would watch TV in this age as like they would go to a bar or something to watch like the Friday night fight, you know, Friday night boxing. And James Beard would come on, I think, after the fight. And so like, you know, of course, like if you're at a bar, big macho man environment, you would think that like, oh, as soon as the fight is over, like everybody's going to go home. But there are apparently reports of, like, men who would watch the fight, and then they would be like, no, like, leave the TV on. James Beard is going to come on, and he's going to do some cool cooking demos.
That's cute. Yeah, I mean, James Beard must have had great on-screen charisma.
Yeah, I think so. Unfortunately, like, because the show is so old and didn't run for, like, super long, I really couldn't find clips of it, which was like, no. Same thing here with Dion Lucas, or Dion. Do you know this woman?
I think it's Dion.
Dion. Okay. I am sorry, ma'am, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I'm pretty sure she's dead. But sorry to her descendants.
I'm sorry that I pronounced your name wrong, but you're dead, so it's fine.
I mean, at least she can't be... Maybe her ghost can be offended, but she personally cannot. If the ghost of Dion Lucas comes and listens to our podcast, I think I'd be honored more than anything. So the Dion Lucas show ran from 1946 to 1956, which is a pretty long time. She was trained at Le Cordon Bleu. She's the first ever female graduate of Le Cordon Bleu, which is cool. Again, I couldn't find any clips of her show online. I think Harvard has, like, a collection of them, but it's the type of thing where, like, you have to go to Harvard to watch them.
Field trip.
Yeah, it was a little disappointing. Maybe I will someday. So Dion Lucas supposedly has a much more, like, stern demeanor, but she's also, like, I mean, she's from Le Cordon Bleu. She's an expert. She is, like, a pro. The appeal to her is, like, watching her accomplish these, like, very complex dishes and things like that. She brings French cooking to the U.S. before Julia Child, to the point where actually Julia Child referred to Dion Lucas as the mother of French cooking. I mean, her show ran for almost 10 years. She was early to the game, and she helped popularize that trend of French cooking. And so speaking of Julia Child, we should talk about Julia Child.
Yes.
Julia Andreas.
Me!
Julia, my co-host, I do think we should watch this minute-ish long clip of The French Chef.
Oh boy.
It's a fun one. It was hard not to spend all my time with this episode just like watching TV.
I mean, I would just be like, for research, and just turn on the Food Network channel.
When you flip anything, you just have to have the courage of your convictions, particularly if it's sort of a loose mass like this. Well, that didn't go very well. See, when I flipped it, I didn't have the courage to do it the way I should have. But you can always pick it up, and if you're alone in the kitchen, who is going to see? But the only way you learn how to flip things is just to flip them.
She's so cute. I love Julia Child.
Yeah, I love her. Do you remember when we went to the museum in DC and we saw Julia Child's kitchen?
Yes.
I don't remember which museum it's at.
I think it's the American History Museum.
Yeah, I think you're right. They have like her, for those that don't know, they have preserved her like whole kitchen in like this like giant glass box basically, where you can like sort of go in it, but you sort of can't. Like, if you've ever been to the aquarium and they have those things where you can like stick your head up, you know, so that you can
yes.
like look around and see the fish like around you. It's kind of like that. I mean, so for those that don't know, Julia Child is a bit of a legend. I think she will also get her own episode one day as well, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about her, but her show that becomes a huge success is called The French Chef, which debuts in 1962 on National Educational Television, which later becomes PBS, or the Public Broadcasting Service. Julia, was there anything that you like noticed in this clip, or like things that were noteworthy to you?
Yeah, I mean, like, one, she's very charismatic in a friendly, very, like, down-to-earth way. She's very charming, but she's not pretentious about it at all, which I think probably lends to why she was able to really bring French food to middle-class America in general, because she has a very approachable air. Like, she makes mistakes, she is just like, okay, that's fine, we'll put some cheese on it and put it in the oven. Like, everyone's gonna think it's tasty anyway, like, don't worry about it. You know, it's just like, you can mess up and you can fix it, and like, you can cook French food. You, viewer.
Me?
On the other side of the TV screen. Yes, you. You too can cook French food. It's not scary, I promise. Look at me, your cool, fun friend, Julia.
Yeah, I would say that's all right. Or that's pretty much what I have in my notes, right? Like, Julia Child is funny. She cooks French food, which a lot of people are interested in at this time, but maybe feel intimidated by. She makes mistakes, and she, like, we were just watching her with the potato, right? She tries to flip this, like, potato dish, and it doesn't really work, but she makes a joke about it, and it stays in the show. She really wants to, like, inspire viewer confidence and educate them. And something else that's important to know, she's on public television. She, like, refuses to do most forms of, like, product placement or advertisements or things like that.
Hell yeah.
I believe The French Chef is, like, sponsored by Safeway and, like, the Polaroid Corporation. But she's very diligent about, like, she doesn't have any labels on anything that she's using. She's very, like, brand agnostic. And she has some showmanship as well, right? Like, there's definitely an entertainment factor. It's, like, a good balance, I guess, of, like, entertaining but also informative. So The French Chef runs through the 1970s, and then Julia Child moves on to other cooking shows on PBS that run through the 1990s.
Prolific, man.
Yeah, I mean, the people love Julia Child. I was watching a clip of her and Emerald making burgers earlier, and it was very cute of like
Aww.
Emerald is this like, because obviously Julia Child is much older at that point, like she's probably in her 70s or 80s or something, so she's like moving slower, but she's still funny.
That's so cute.
You know, this is where we start to think about cooking shows as also possibly being entertainment instead of purely in the informative space, I guess. After Julia Child, we also have Joyce Chen Cooks, which runs from 1966 to 1967. There's only 26 episodes, but it is hosted by Chinese-American immigrant Joyce Chen, one of the few women of color just on TV at the time, like just in general, but definitely the first cooking show with a person of color host, especially in that like expert role. I mean, there's definitely a lot of like exoticism that happens, but she is still presented as like an expert. We don't doubt like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. It's also, so like America is having, like, we're interested in French food. We're also interested in Chinese food at this point. This is a couple of years before Nixon visits China. And like, as we have sort of briefly mentioned before, there's the whole interest in like Chinese restaurants and that type of thing.
I think also just like fashion wise, this is the time period of Orientalism in clothing as well, and like design. Her set is very Orientalist as well.
Yeah. It's actually the same set that Julia Child uses.
What?
For the French chef, but they just sort of give it some quote unquote Oriental, like Chinese style decorations. Joyce Chen also is like a really good entrepreneur. She has several restaurants. She still has, you can go to the grocery store today and still buy Joyce Chen sauces. If you have ever used a wok with a flat bottom and a handle, you can thank Joyce Chen for that.
Whoa.
She patented that. So her show did not necessarily last long, but she really capitalized on it.
I feel like now we have to make an episode on Joyce Chen. I'm so fascinated.
Next, we have The Galloping Gourmet, which runs from 1969 to 1971, hosted by this guy, Graham Kerr. He's a very handsome playboy type. He has a live studio audience, which is a little different than, or that's like a new-ish thing that we are obviously well familiar with now, right? The like live studio audience type thing. But that's sort of new at the time. Kerr is actually like, has been cooking since he was young. His wife is his TV producer and specifically produced the show as like, it should be entertaining.
Oh, interesting.
It needs to be funny. So like, I was reading some like, she would like put things in the set to like trip him up or see how he would react. And there would be like gags and goofs, and because she was like, cooking shows are boring. We need to keep things really exciting so that people keep watching. So Julia, I would like for you to read this little description. This is from the Bloomsbury Handbook of Food and Popular Culture, and this is describing kind of the opening of The Galloping Gourmet.
Okay. Kerr always entered with a drink in his hand, and the stage was partly the living room of a bachelor apartment with guns on the wall and an open bar, which was partly a kitchen in which Kerr, in a fashionable and colorful jacket and tie, demonstrated his cooking skills, accompanied by his vivid and ironic language. His energetic cooking was always tested by a female member of the audience. Thus, the heterosexual seduction that was also part of the Playboy's cooking was sustained in Kerr's show. So it's a spicy show.
It's a show for boys.
It's a show for boys.
Well, actually, I don't even know if it's for boys. It's just like a little, like you said, spicy. We'll watch a clip. Oh, I might have fast-forwarded this too far. Just, like, rewind it all the way to the beginning.
I don't know, I'm watching him dance with a chicken. This is giving me, like, big Monty Python vibes.
That's very true, yeah. Yeah, and even, I'm still watching the part with the chicken, and he's like, he doesn't just, like, cut it. He's just, like, whacking the wings off.
This man is just throwing that knife around. He's just a goofball.
I was watching a couple of clips to try to find, like, a good one for us to watch, and so YouTube is now going to think that I like this show. I don't. I think it's not for me. It's also interspersed with, like, travel bits, so every episode is, like, he goes somewhere, and then he's like, here's this. So this one is, like, this is this roast turkey recipe that I learned from somewhere in Hungerford, England. And so then he tells you about it, and then he cooks it. But it's also interspersed with, like, clips from the trip. So it's a little bit of that, like, travelogue type show. And it's also, like, a little different than other cooking shows we've talked about, where it's, I guess, sort of more like a variety show in the sense of, like, it's not just a person in a kitchen showing you how to make egg foo young or whatever.
It kind of seems like a satire of cooking shows in the way. Like, the way he's just, like, chopping up the chicken or the sausage with, like, no sort of chef finesse. It is very slapstick. Like I said, it's like if Monty Python was like, let's do a cooking show.
And there are a lot of people who say that there's, like, too much goofing. Like, Julia Child says his food preparation was, quote, a desecration of fine cooking. So
I love how people have such hot opinions about things.
Yeah, she's really coming for him. And I think really what we're hitting, like, I think this hits a nerve because it's hitting on that idea of, like, are cooking shows supposed to be informative and educational, or are they supposed to be entertainment? And I think some people are upset because it's too much in the realm of entertainment, right? You're not really showing someone how to make a roast turkey. You're just making it look like fun and exciting. Okay, so that's Graham Care. We do have some additional cooking shows on public television in the 1970s and 80s. Public television is really like in charge when it comes to cooking shows for quite a while until we get cable TV.
Oh-ho.
So, Julia, I would like to tell you about the development of cable TV. But first, could you give us the food fact of the day?
Oh, I'm so excited to. Let's go.
Let's go.
Nicole!
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Taco Liberty Bell?
Okay. Reading this, I feel like yes, or like that term sounds familiar to me, but I could not tell you what it is. You may like start to tell me about this and I'll be like, oh yeah, but immediately I could not tell you.
Okay, great. Because I was like, I need a food fact of the day, but I also need to tell you about the Taco Liberty Bell. So I'm gonna make my food fact of the day about the Taco Liberty Bell, even though it's not really about food.
Excellent.
I'm gonna set the scene. It is 1996. I am a little baby. I'm about to turn 1 year old.
Smell.
There's Tamagotchis and colorful prints and way too much teal and purple color combos.
Mm-hmm.
And on April 1st, 6 major American newspapers, the Philadelphia Inquirer, New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Dallas Morning News, and USA Today released a full-page ad, which I will read for you, and you can see the little picture down there. In an effort to help with the national debt, Taco Bell is pleased to announce that we have agreed to purchase the Liberty Bell, one of our country's most historic treasures. It will now be called the Taco Liberty Bell, and will still be accessible for the American public for viewing. While some may find this controversial, we hope our move will prompt other corporations to take similar action to do their part to reduce the country's debt.
That's awesome.
So yeah, the ad is essentially saying that Taco Bell has bought the Liberty Bell.
Her?
In another press release, Taco Bell expanded on the joke. They were like, yeah, so now that we have the Taco Liberty Bell, we're gonna like ship it back and forth. Like it's gonna spend half of its time in Philadelphia, but then like the other half is gonna be at the Taco Bell headquarters because we own it now.
Oh my god.
And they boasted like, Taco Bell's heritage and imagery have revolved around the symbolism of the bell. Now we have the crown jewel of bells.
Oh, that's great.
And I don't know how you would have felt, Nicole, as a baby, but people were concerned.
Yeah.
People had hot opinions about this April Fool's joke. Thousands of worried citizens called both like Taco Bell's headquarters and also like the National Park Service in Philadelphia to find out if like Taco Bell had really bought the bell, and like the National Park Service was like, the fuck is going on? Yeah. Why are people calling us about this?
Do you think Taco Bell gave the National Park Service a heads up?
I know for a fact they didn't, because the National Park Service doesn't even own the Liberty Bell.
Oh, that's so funny. Who owns the Liberty Bell then?
The city of Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
They also like put in this ad like a day before it was published, so they were like very hush-hush about the entire hoax. But yeah, so the National Park Service is like, I have no idea what's going on. And so they arranged, again, this is like still in like the span of a day, right?
Yeah.
So in the morning we have the press release and the ad. Mid-morning, the Park Service arranges a conference, like a news conference, to assure the public that the bell has not been sold. A spokesman is like, the Liberty Bell is safe. It is not for sale. Again, they don't even own the Liberty Bell.
That's so funny, because they're like, we don't even like go here. I don't know why you keep asking us.
She doesn't even go here.
Exactly.
At noon on April 1st, Taco Bell issued a second press release in which they confessed that it was in fact a hoax, and they called it the best joke of the day, and they announced that they would be donating like a fair sum of money to the upkeep of the Liberty Bell. I don't know if they did, but that's what they said they were going to do. But people did not find the joke funny because there were a bunch of sticks in the mud. So Mark Schoenrock, I think is how you pronounce his name. Sorry, Mark, if you're alive. If you're dead, we've already established that it doesn't matter.
He's killing everyone. God. Our podcast has become Death Note. If your name appears in our notes, you're dead. You're already dead.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everyone. He wrote in the Washington Post, "To appropriate one of the cherished symbols of our national heritage and use it as part of some cheap, thoughtless advertising ploy is totally disgusting. To use the sacred symbol as part of some silly game is an affront to generations of proud Americans who have fought and died for this country's freedom, so proudly represented by the Liberty Bell. Apparently, this doesn't matter to Taco Bell officials, or maybe they just don't get it."
Dang.
Mic drop. Mark drop, sorry.
Mark drop. Yes, let's be real. I feel like you could do this today in our late stage capitalist marketing consumerist hellscape.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like people would care. This is the type of thing that maybe offended people 30 years ago, but now I do feel like someone could say oh, Taco Bell is buying the Liberty Bell, and we'd probably be like, oh man, all right, I think the roles between government and corporation have become so intertwined that I don't feel like it would be surprising. I don't know.
I feel like if this happened today, people wouldn't be surprised.
They'd
be like, yeah, that tracks, I guess. But then I think you would still have the same paragraph in the paper.
That's true. This would be the Fox News headline of our country's history is being desecrated.
How dare they buy the Liberty Bell? Which, by the way, the Liberty Bell is more of a myth than it is a reality. Modern scholars consider its very iconic status a creation of mid-19th century writers who created the tale that the Liberty Bell was wrong to announce the Declaration of Independence. In reality, the steeple of the Philadelphia State House, which is where the Liberty Bell was in disrepair in 1776, so it is highly doubtful that the Liberty Bell was wrong at all to signal the signing of the Declaration.
So really, it's just the bell from the Philadelphia State House.
It is just the bell from the Philadelphia State House, which, in very classic American mythology, had mythology put onto it. Like Plymouth Rock and this big bell, we're like, oh, you see that? You see that thing? It's important now, because it is. Because we say so. Even though it's just a rock or it's just a State House bell. So that is my food fact of the day. I just wanted to walk you through the best April Fool's joke ever.
I think it's also such a called shot that they say it's the best joke of the day. That's so bold of them, but I love them for it. I mean, when you originally said Taco Liberty Bell, I was thinking Taco Bell comes out with a Doritos Locos Taco bowl, but it's it's upside down, so it looks like a bell. I don't know. That's what I was envisioning. Or they just deep fry the Liberty Bell and put cheese sauce on it. They deep fry
the Liberty Bell. Also, wouldn't be surprising in our modern day and age if someone's just I deep fried the Liberty Bell on my YouTube prank channel.
Well, speaking of the modern day, we are going to get wiggy with it. But first, we have to talk about cable TV. Okay, so let's talk about the rise of cable. So at this point, TV has been around for a little while. It's popular, obviously, because it's TV. We all love TV. We have many more stations, and we also have cable TV, right? So not just public access, but stations that you pay for. So at this point in history, more general shows and networks are having trouble keeping audiences, basically because there's more options. There's more than just 4 channels, so it's not like you have a forced audience, right? Channels have to actually compete with each other. So as a result, rather than this more general approach of we have all kinds of programming, networks start to target much more specific audiences, or they have a particular shtick. So if you want to think about Nickelodeon, which specifically has children's programming, or MTV, which specifically has music TV, right? That's the name. So with that, we get the launch of the TVFN, or Television Food Network, in 1993.
TVFN.
I think the early years of Food Network can be summarized best by the title of this early show, which is How to Boil Water, which is, I think, bold. Of like, I just was picturing like, so if I'm like, oh, I wonder what's on Food Network, and I see something called How to Boil Water, like that sounds like the most boring show possible.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to play into that, but bizarrely, it's hosted by Emeril Lagasse.
Oh, hello.
We're going to talk about him more in a minute. But so, like, it is very staunchly, like, informative, educational. Like, they think the goal is, like, teach people how to cook. Because the executives at Food Network think that, like, okay, well, our audience is, like, people who want to learn to cook. Like, they are assuming that people are watching cooking shows for that, like, educational purpose, right? Mm-hmm. They're assuming that their audience does not have a lot of knowledge of cooking or things like that. So they have shows like How to Boil Water that are much more basic, and they're also scripted. And it's also very much just like you have a host in a kitchen and they like just make a thing and that's it. So this show doesn't do very well, and actually Emeril kind of struggles in this role because it's scripted.
He's gotta go bam. They're not letting him go bam.
So they put a woman in charge, which is obviously a better choice.
Yep.
So this woman named Erica Gruen, who had been working as a media consultant for the network, basically since its inception, or even before it was formally a network. So she gets promoted to CEO and president in 1996. So this is, about 3 years after the network has been on the air.
Who knows how many months after the Taco Bell April Fool's joke.
Oh, you're right. It's a big year for food in 1996.
It's a big year.
Another source that was really instrumental in my research for this episode was this book called Watching What We Eat by Kathleen Collins. Love that title. It's all about TV cooking shows. So if you want a lot more detail on this subject, I would recommend picking that up. So Julia, can you please read what Kathleen Collins says about Food Network's, like, new strategy after Erica Gruen takes the reins?
Gruen's strategy was to shift the programming emphasis from people who like to cook to people who love to eat. I'd worked in television long enough to understand that people don't watch television to learn things, said Gruen. She continued, they watch television to have fun. It's an entertainment medium. And if they learn something while they're having fun, that's good too. That's a plus. But if you want to learn how to cook, there are tons of cookbooks and magazines you can read. You're not going to watch television to learn how to cook. So we can provide an entertaining experience, but we don't have to give every little detail. Smart.
Yeah.
Clever. Clever girl.
This is why you put women in charge. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about, like, female CEOs, girl boss, businesswoman, whatever.
Gatekeep gaslight.
Yeah,
boss.
exactly. But, I mean, it's a very smart business strategy. I selected this quote specifically because she is talking to what we have been talking to this whole episode, right? Of the idea of, like, are people watching because they want to be educated, or are people watching because they want to be entertained? Mm-hmm. And she feels very strongly that it is about entertainment, not necessarily education. So Food Network sort of takes this strategy and they start changing their programming to fit that. Probably their biggest investment at this point in this strategy, or the, like, thing that test that they do to see if it sort of pays off, is they take Emeril from suffering in How to Boil Water and they give him this show instead called Emeril Live, which you may have seen, folks may be familiar with. He has a studio audience, he has a house band, no script, they let him say bam.
Dang, house band.
And this is, let me try my Borat voice, great success. I don't know if that's my best Borat voice.
That's pretty good.
I wanted to get it clean,
Get it clean for the ringtone.
Exactly. Okay, so let's watch just like a first minute or two of Emeril here.
Ooh,
actually, this episode is about burgers. I did have a burger for lunch today because I was watching all these clips.
I'm gonna have like a big burger hankering. We've mentioned it at least 3 times in this show, and therefore I will crave it.
Yeah. I do also, it's important to note that this is Emeril Live, but at the top it says previously recorded. The show is not actually live. He just has a live studio audience.
Huh. All right.
I asked myself, so, can I kick up burgers and fries one more notch?
There's a whole audience in there.
And the answer was, oh yeah, babe. Speaking about kicking it up, Doc Gibbs and the Everline Band.
Whoa, the band. Oh my God. Just a whole band there. Why would they give this man a script? Why would they torture his little soul like that?
See, I used to watch this show all the time as a little kid, so watching this like little intro, I'm like, oh my God.
This explains a lot of your personality.
Does it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Your humor especially.
Oh, it's all from Emerald.
It's all from Emerald.
Okay, so Julia, what do you notice about like this little bit from Emerald Live compared to like the clip we watched of Julia Child or the clip we watched of Joyce Chin or even the clip we watched of Graham Kerr?
He's a personality hire.
Yeah. Not a diversity hire. No, a personality
hire. He is the personality, right? Like he's more of a talk show host than like a cooking show host. At least in the clip that I saw, you know.
I'm snapping with approval.
He's very charismatic. He's cracking jokes, like he's interacting with the audience. I'm sure he's a great chef as well, but I think what stands out most is the personality of it, the charisma, the riz, if you will, as the kids say.
I think it's so funny that you said he's like a talk show host because I had sources that literally said that. Like, what is the difference between this and like a Jimmy Kimmel or like a Jay Leno?
I'm a professional, folks.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the same of like they come in to like there's a live audience. They come into all kinds of cheers. They're interacting with the audience. He has a kind of like opening monologue. He's even wearing a suit before, like he has his chef outfit on under it, but he's wearing a suit. You know, there's a house band. There's a high production value for sure. And so, as I said, this is a great success.
Great success.
I only did it once. I'm only going to do it once. You get one Borat voice. So through Emerald and these like personality type hires, right, Food Network learns that they can be much more successful marketing specific personalities instead of educating the audience into how to cook. I mean, think about it today, right? We have the idea of like the celebrity chef or like you turn on Food Network and you watch Guy Fieri. He's got many shows at this point, right? But you're watching for him, you know? Yeah. It's Guy Fieri's Diner Drives and Dives, whatever. I don't think his name is actually in there. But, I mean, think about, I don't know if you have ever seen Guy Fieri's actual first show, The Next Food Network Star. It's The Next Food Network Star, not The Next Food Network Chef or anything like that, right? Like, they are literally trying to create like personalities and brands to get viewership. So with that, your Next Food Network star or Next Food Network show may be one of these three types of cooking shows, which are also from Lori Brost's dissertation. So she says there's three types. She says we have domestic cooks, professional chefs, and travelers. Domestic cooks are what I would like probably what you'd consider your kind of like conventional cooking show. So she describes these as, quote, the cook, whether or not she or he is a professional chef by trade, is located in a domestic kitchen setting constructed in a television show where she or he remains for the entire show, right? So you have a host who is in like a studio kitchen and they just live in that little kitchen room. So you can think of your Rachel Ray, your Barefoot Contessa, Julia Child. Yep, there she is. I got her in here. So I read another article by Cherry Ketchum who divides this category further. And she says that we have like traditional domestic instructional cooking and personality-driven domestic cooking shows. So think of like the difference between like a Rachel Ray or an Emerald Live or like a Wolfgang Puck. They're just sort of showing you how to cook. It's less about like who is showing you how to cook versus personality driven is like, well, I'm here to see Emerald or Mario Batali or whoever. I'm sure will shock you to hear this, but there is often a gendered line between these two.
What?
So in our second category, we have professional chefs. So Lori Brost says, quote, "At least one professional chef is featured each episode at his or her place of work. Typically, the show is videotaped in a different location for each episode. Usually no on-camera host appears, but rather an off-camera narrator introduces and concludes the program and provides details to supplement the visuals and audio provided by the chef." So I was trying to think of examples of these. Do any of these come to mind for you, Julia, of like a show like this? I feel like they're rarer nowadays because we are very personality focused.
There's that one, it was like a Netflix show that was essentially this, where it just like went to like from chef to chef and featured them in like 5 of their dishes. And God, I can't remember what it was, but it had like stunning visuals.
I think that's what we're going for, right? Is usually these types of shows where the examples that she gave, I haven't heard of these before, but great chefs, great cities, cooking at the academy. So I think the category of like best chefs of wherever kind of falls into that, right? Where like they just sort of spotlight a different person each time. Then we have our last category of cooking show as defined by Lori Brost is travelers. I think this one's kind of obvious, but think of like your Anthony Bourdain, your Andrew Zimmern, hosts traveling around to exotic places and trying the local cuisine. Oftentimes this is like a combination of like travel show and a cooking show, right? So there's probably like demos of cooking, but also of traveling or local scenery or what have you. I also want to throw into the ring the cooking competition show, because I think that's a little bit more of a modern-ish conception. I mean, Iron Chef has been around for a while. Hell's Kitchen has been around for a while. But the cooking competition show doesn't really revolve around a particular personality or host, even though there might be a notable host, or the kind of like, I'm thinking of Hell's Kitchen, the like reality show personal drama of like who gets the villain arc or who gets the redemption arc, that type of editing type thing. But the focus of the show is mostly about the competition.
Cupcake Wars,
Chopped, Iron Chef, any of those, I think. There's lots of cooking competition shows nowadays. And I think nowadays, as we move into the digital era of streaming and also just like online content, so like away from cable, we have so many options of cooking shows that you can watch.
Oh, yeah.
Like YouTube is full of them, which is like what I watch a lot on YouTube. We also have TikTok and all those like food trends or the like easy hacks to do whatever in the kitchen. We have Tasty from BuzzFeed. Anybody can have a cooking show now and tailor it to an extremely specific interest if you want. I'm going to give a shout out to Emma for showing me this show. Do you know Mr. Sausage?
I don't.
I think the name of the channel is actually Ordinary Sausage. It's a man who just makes sausage out of like just whatever, right? Like anything possible. I was looking on his channel earlier for an example, and he has one where he like has made a sausage out of Vaseline.
Oy.
Or there's one that's like a water sausage, right? Of just like, can I turn this thing into, like, can I put it in a sausage casing and make it a sausage? So anyway, you can get that granular. And I think I would argue now with these like sort of shorter mediums of like YouTube, often usually shorter than a TV show. TikTok especially has to be shorter than a normal TV show. And also we have shorter attention spans. We have more emphasis on presentation, how food looks, and it being visually pleasing than necessarily how it tastes.
Yeah.
I mean, think of like, the Instagram food pics, right? It's more about like getting the perfect shot or like how does it look than like necessarily how does it taste. Or at least like how it looks is really important.
Yeah, it's all about visuals.
Okay, so now I think we should get wiggy with it.
Oh, now we're getting wiggy with it.
Yeah, no, I didn't forget. So if we want to go back to our original history of like radio show hosts, like I said, women listening often form this kind of like parasocial relationship with these radio homemakers. There's a feeling of like intimacy. There's the idea of like, this feels like your neighbor or like a close friend. So that's almost like expected of these hosts, right? That they be like friendly, entertaining, and that I have this quote here from Lori Brost that women did not want to be lectured to. They preferred to be talked to or visited with as a friend.
Yeah.
And also, advertising is more effective if it comes from a friend or word of mouth than like someone telling you to buy a Westinghouse blender versus like a friend of yours saying like, oh, I just bought this Westinghouse blender and I really love it. It's like why we have influencers selling us mattresses and food delivery services.
Yeah. It's why the influencer economics? Is that what I'm trying to say?
Oh, the like business model?
Yeah.
But are you saying that like that is how that kind of business model works? Of like it depends on that like relatability factor.
Yes. That is what I'm trying to say and failing miserably. I'm not a professional, folks. I take it back.
That's okay. I did just have to Google Westinghouse blender to make sure that Westinghouse actually makes blenders, and they do. So I feel better now. I was afraid. I was like, I keep using this as an example. What if they don't actually make blenders?
That'd be embarrassing.
Then I would not be a professional. It would be me who's the silly one. Let's see. So getting back to getting wiggy with it, I think this episode is a great time for us to air our long-held grievances against the pioneer woman, Ree Drummond.
I saw her name on the notes and I was like, that heckin' lady.
I know.
Keeping it PG.
Trying to keep it PG. So I'll say that, like, I'm going to read this quote and then we're going to say why we both hate the pioneer woman so much. This is from a chapter in the Bloomsbury Handbook of Food and Popular Culture. Quote, in programs hosted by men, cooking expresses authority and connoisseurship, whereas cooking in shows hosted by women is portrayed as a way to embrace traditional feminine values of nurturing and home management. I mean, I think for all of their efforts, there's definitely still gendered expectations when it comes to like the hosts and how shows are marketed, how the sets are designed, all that type of stuff. Male chefs are often portrayed as experts or entertainers, right? They're wearing a chef's jacket that might be filmed in their restaurant. They might be using like industry terms. Rarely are they cooking at home for the family and kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, it's not a complete, like, binary. There's obviously exceptions to every rule. But think about, you know, you have your flashy male professional chef hosts like Emeril, Bobby Flay, Mario Batali, versus your softer, your domestic, your home cooks like Ina Garten, Ree Drummond, and Rachel Ray. So, Julia, please explain to the people at home our long-held grudge against the pioneer woman.
I'm sitting here like, why do I hate her again? I just do.
Well, I think what we've talked about in the past is, like, she is, I think, like...
She's trad wife.
She is 100%. I think she's the original trad wife.
OG trad wife. Yeah. Which is why we could never stand her.
She's OG trad wife in the sense of, like, her show is all about she lives on this big ranch and she is always in the kitchen. She's cooking for her hard-working husband and family.
Yeah, gotta cook for her boys who are out in the fields, and, like, her daughters have to help her in the kitchen sometimes.
It's very, like, traditional gender norms of the idea of, like, she is the wife, she is cooking for them. There's some of the, like, you know, time-saving tips, but she does not seem, I mean, again, a lot of this is just, like, about marketing and how she's portrayed, but, like, she seems very flat to me in terms of, like, she does not really seem to have a personality outside of this kind of servitude.
Yeah. No, her personality is trad wife. And, like, to get petty.
Let's do it.
Her recipes aren't even good. Like, they don't even, if we're talking visuals, they don't look good. If we're talking about, like, how they probably taste, like, they don't look good either. Yeah, to get real petty with it, Nicole and I would just be on our... in our little apartment on the bed watching Food Network, and then she'd come on and we'd be like, it's like that meme where people like stand up from the table and like they leave.
Yeah.
So we're like, no, not this lady.
Yep, that's exactly what would happen. Something else that it's just like a random piece that I read in my research that I thought was fascinating on this subject, since we're getting wiggy with it, is like some other like gender dynamic that I don't think I've ever noticed before, but at least looking back, I'm like, I think they might be right, was that women chefs or women hosts usually don't eat the food at the end of the episode, but men often do?
I'm thinking now, and I'm just like, well, what have I watched lately? And I'm like, I don't know if I can remember the barefoot Contessa, like, eating anything at the end, ever.
I mean, with men hosts, there's often this, like, big show of, like, I mean, think of Guy Fieri getting in there with his sandwich, right? He's, like, getting in there. He's doing the hunch. They're, like, you know, whatever it is they cook, they're like, oh, it's so good. You know, it's, like, very, like, sensual, pleasurable. But women, and like maybe this is speaking to larger, I think this is speaking to larger like societal expectations of like, oh, women should be prim and proper. I mean, we have weird stuff about eating in front of people and bodies and weight and image and all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think like thinking about it now, like I'm just gonna use Barefoot Contessa as an example because that's the one I watch the most of.
Right.
But if she was not serving the food to Joffrey at the end, you know, she's either like serving the food to her husband at the end, or it is like a party, and this is true for some other female cooking shows that I remember as well, where like they're cooking for like a party and they're having like their little party at the end, and then all of these women are sitting down at a table and taking like small bites. Like, you know, it's not about the food, it's about sitting down and like it's about serving the food. It's about serving the food to the people or your husband, or like in the case of the pioneer woman, serving it to her family, you know. Like I don't think they may be sitting at the table, they may take like a bite, but it is never like you said in Diners, Drivers, and Diners, Drive-ins, and Dives. Triple D. It is never, I am getting in there with the burger, or like, I just made this big garlic bread. I'm gonna take a big old bite and be like, it's so delicious. I mean, Fanny Farmer would have.
Yeah.
We all know her, we all love her. Fanny Farmer would have. But like, I don't think I've ever seen that in like a cooking show.
Yeah. I think, not to say like it never happens, I think it's definitely rare. I mean, I also, astonishing that we have gone this whole episode and not mentioned Martha Stewart yet.
Oh my god.
Martha, also, maybe an episode someday? I don't know.
She's gotta be.
But yeah, I think of like her, you know, there's definitely like a lot of those scenes of like, it's about entertaining, right? Of like, they have a group of friends over at the end and they're all sitting at a table and they're laughing and having a lovely little time with all the like, oh, look at this beautiful food that Martha Stewart has made for us or whatever. Rarely is it like, I'm starving, I'm gonna dig in, Mom, this is so good, you know. Well, it might be, Mom, this is so good. It might not be Mom digging in and being like, I did a great job with this pasta carbonara. Another cool thing that I read was this article about post-feminism. Basically, for those that don't know, post-feminism refers to the idea that, like, oh, we've achieved gender equality, we are now living, like, after feminism is, like, no longer necessary. So I read this cool article about post-feminism and, like, time, the construction of time through the lens of, like, TV and consumer culture, which is, like, so fascinating. This dissertation, which was, I gotta find the name, by Elizabeth Nathanson. Let me give credit. So Dr. Nathanson's dissertation was about how cooking shows still, after all this time, like construct these gender norms, but they have also shifted. Gender norms are slightly different, but they are still, like, we still have them, I guess is what I'm saying. So, like, because, for example, many middle-class women now work full-time, as opposed to, if you think back in the 1950s, you had, like, a single-earner household, the wife is the housewife. Many women are now working full-time, and so there's a good chunk of TV shows, cooking shows, that are positioned as like the quick and easy, right, for the working woman or the working mom. So again, 30-minute meals with Rachel Ray. I think generally also we have a lot of binaries within this subject. You know, we have cooking for fun versus cooking to solve a problem, like feed the family in 30 minutes. We have the entertain versus the inform. We have cooking as art, and we should labor over it, versus like cooking should be efficient or time-saving. We have food snobbery versus everyman food. We have, getting back to gendered expectations, the public versus the private spheres, which is like the home. So I think it's interesting that like we just have, I found that there are so many like binaries that just kept coming up like throughout this research for this episode. I don't know if you have any final thoughts, Julia.
Yeah. I mean, like, bringing it back to what we talked about, or what you talked about in the very beginning, I think you can really get a good look at the time period that we live in, or that we have lived in, or in the past, based on the cooking shows or like just the food media in general that is being presented, right? Like we mentioned earlier about, you know, we have Tasty, we have a bunch of YouTube cooking shows, some of that are like extremely niche.
Like Mr. Sausage.
Yeah, Mr. Sausage, also Roll for Sandwich, which I guess is like loosely a cooking show.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like one of my favorites is Imamu Room, and it's like it's very peaceful, and she immigrated to Canada with her husband, and they have like a daughter, and she made like husbentos, like lunchboxes for her husband, but it was just like Japanese home cooking, but making do with like what you have in Canada and like access to in like the local Korean market and stuff. And it's very niche, but it also again fits into, you know, that very similar binary that we've talked about, where like usually if it is a woman cooking, she is making stuff for her family. And I mean, like, you know, referencing post-feminism, we are like, things have changed so dramatically, but things also have not changed very dramatically. There is still the expectation that women, you know, shown through cooking shows, are making food for other people. Men are making food because they are experts.
Right.
Or it is for them. It is for their enjoyment. And I'm sure, like, that will continue to grow in some ways and remain stagnant in others. But, you know, our media and the texts, as you said, quotes around texts that we leave behind as, like, you know, we go through years and decades are markers of, like, what we are currently living in. And I think it's really neat to, like, look back and see, like, this is what people were living in back in the radio era. Like, this is what people needed then. And so it's like, we can also kind of be aware of what do people need now. And that's niche content about making Vaseline sausages. And that's okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I think also just the like idea of like super niche content really speaks to, I mean, it's kind of hard to speak historically about a period we are currently living in, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think it really speaks to like the fragmentation of our society as we sort of approach this like hyper late capitalist period of like, and the idea of streaming services as well, of the like getting exactly what you want, or like everything exists on the internet in some form. So I think that's kind of cool.
Your texts become extremely personal, right? Like you get to choose, you get to select. It's very selective what you're reading or watching or listening to.
And when you think about it, this podcast is also a text and product
oh no!
We broke your brains.
My brain.
Now you know what it felt like to be like a 19-year-old in a literary methods class.
I'm back there in the lecture hall.
That's me in the corner. That's me in the left-handed desk, even though I'm right-handed.
Losing my goddamn brain.
Well, what we would advise you to do, dear listener, is to go and cook something because you want to.
Make some burgers, because, like, I'm craving burgers now. Go watch these cooking shows. They're fun.
Yeah, you should. I'm going to link the clip of Emerald and Julia Child making burgers together, too, because Julia Child, she loves bacon, and the audience goes wild for that, watching this, like, 80-year-old woman eat bacon, which I think is definitely a product of its time, the early mid-2000s, where we had a bacon craze. All right, well, I think with that, thanks for lunching with us. And
we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Our theme music is Red Onions by Louis Zong. Please check out the rest of his album Vegetable Soul in the description. You can follow us on Twitter at Girls Lunch. Nicole is also on Twitter at NicoleH262, and her website is NicoleHilton.com. Julia is smarter than all of us and not on social media. Thank you for listening. Hit it, house band.
Hit it, house band. Louis Zong.